Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. You caught me during my study period. I was trying to get some tactics and some stuff together so I can defeat everybody in the world. Anyways, how's everybody doing out there today? Appreciate you guys stopping by. It is it's pretty early today. It's 12 something a.m. over there in the Philippines. So it is officially morning. So magandang umaga, maanyong buntag, aking mga kaibigan. Appreciate you guys stopping by. Kamusta na? Ingat lagi mabuhay to you guys. Appreciate you guys stopping by, taking a look at my videos. So what I figured I'll go ahead and do, I made a video a long time ago between Rogelio Antonio Jr. And Roderick Nava, and that was my best video to date. But I made a video yesterday and it had Eugene Torre, and it did pretty well. So it's kind of a shot in the dark, but I figured what I'll go ahead and do right now while we're in the off season of a tournament is I'll just kind of do like a Eugene Torre series. So I'll just pick a different game every day. If I can get 2 games in a day, I'll go ahead and do that. But let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you guys want me to do some other people, or just kind of what you guys have. Just leave it in the comments. But I have the game Eugene Torre versus Emmanuel Senador. And this is taken also from 2012 Philippine Grand Final. So if you guys are ready to go, let's take a look, see what we got for the game. All right, so we got d4, we got knight to f6, and we have bishop to g5. So we have the Trompowsky. Like I said before, a lot of people, when they're playing in a tournament, they usually stick to around the same type of opening. If they are the type of person that changes openings, I'm kind of a specialist when it comes to openings. I don't really understand how people can know so many different openings. I feel like it's too hard, but some people kind of, they switch and do different things. So, we see a Trompowsky again like we did in the game before. And this is actually the big center variation after e6 and e4. So, you're taking advantage of this pin here. That the fact that the knight can't move to establish a really nice pawn center. So black gets irritated and says, I want that bishop out of the way. So we see h6, bishop takes f6. We got queen taking f6. We got c3. This is similar to what you guys have seen in like Sicilians. You have a really, really big pawn center and you have the C pawn, just supporting the center. So it's a really, really solid structure. So we have d6 by black. Bishop comes to d3. We have knight to c6. Knight to e2. We have a6. We have castles by white. We have e5. We have knight to a3 by white. And before I get to what was actually played in the game, I thought that I would choose this point to do the guess the move situation. So I'm actually gonna be putting a couple of moves down on the board that weren't played in the game. But it's kind of instructive. I'm curious how many of you guys have seen this or not. So if black was to go pawn takes d4, white was to go pawn takes d4. Okay, so if you were black, what would you actually play here? What looks like a good move? Do you feel like you have the opportunity to pull out some type of tactic or win some material, or what's the situation? Like I said, if you were black, what would you actually play here? Go ahead and take a second to make your decision. Okay, cool. So this is a tactic that I remember seeing. I played when I was I think it was 2009 or 2010 when I first ever got on chess.com. I played this guy. Some of you guys might have heard of him. He's a FIDE master, and he goes by the Magician on chess.com. And this is when I was like 800 or 900 rated. So I really, really, really was low. So I had never seen this tactic before. But for some of you guys out there, it might look like this pawn is just like, for the taking, because you're thinking, okay, you're doing your calculations, saying, okay, if I take here with the knight, he takes with the knight, I take with the queen, and then I just have an like a pawn, like it just looks like it's just a free pawn, right? Well, the thing that you have to be thinking about is the fact that this king is on a light square diagonal, and this is a light square bishop. So like I said, this was something this was like 2009, 2010. You know, I just completely just fell for this trap. And this was in a French advance that I fell for this. But, you know, it can be present in many different, you know, you see it in many different positions. So like I said, if knight did take on d4 thinking you're going to win a pawn, the knight takes on d4, queen takes on d4, and you would actually be looking at bishop to b5 with check. Now, this is giving away the bishop, but you are going to be winning this queen. So it's a very, very fair trade. So like I said, let me see. Can't flip the, okay. Like I said, the best situation for you to do as black would probably be bishop to d7. And this would be asking white the question of, do you really want to lose the pawn now? Because the pawn would actually be gone. You know, if white was to do something, you know, let's say like they do something like h3, you know, then you actually would be threatening the pawn because now there isn't a check because the bishop is blocking that check. So that was just something interesting. I think a majority of you guys would see that. But there might be some people out there that might not have seen that before. And like I said, this particular pattern is present in a lot of different types of positions. I get people, you know, when the bishop is, you know, removed and discovered, I get people on it all different kinds of ways and all different kinds of positions. So it's not just specific to one particular position. But if we go back, we did see knight to a3, and we actually saw g5 in the game. You know, which is a nice way to play. You know, you're just trying to throw a little bit of attack. The interesting thing for white in this position is the fact that they don't have the knight on f3. So this is a very vulnerable point. So g5 is trying to kind of exclaim that a little bit. So we see knight over to c2, and that is definitely protecting this d4 pawn now because it wasn't protected before. You know, like I said, with the, you know, with the discovered attack situation. So bishop comes to g7, we see knight to g3, and we see h5. And this is a really nice idea because it is threatening to open this file. And white has to be very careful of the way that they play. So the knight takes on h5, we see queen to h6. And as you guys can see, this is, you know, threatening checkmate. So this is a really kind of iffy situation. So what we saw in the game was knight takes g7 with check. That is literally the only move you can make because any other move is going to fail to checkmate in one. So we saw king to f8, and then we saw knight back to h5. We already won a piece, so you know we're doing pretty good as far as pawns go because we did win a pawn as well. But you have to kind of block the mate. If we back up a touch after the queen comes to h6, you know the computer really liked bishop to e2. Just defending the knight, you know, grabbing the pawn and just saying, hey, I won the pawn. And then after g4, which is disconnecting the protection of the knight, you would actually see knight takes g7 with check. After king came to f8, we would see h3, pawn taking h3, and then we see knight back down to h5, protecting the h file. And then after the pawn takes on g2, we see rook to e1. This is the most accurate way to play. But like I said, this is a computer doing this. So at the end of the day, you know, a human is going to play it a little bit differently. So it takes a lot of strength and calculation to play this way. But like I said, in the game, we did see knight takes g7. The king comes to f8, knight back down to h5. And then Torre found a pretty nice way of defending. You know, he's already up a pawn and a piece at this point. So when he loses the piece, he's still up the pawn. So this is what you're going to see. So g4 comes, we see h4, and then we see queen taking h5, and then we see g3. So this was Torre's way of defending against this threat mate. So as you, the checkmate. So as you can see, there really isn't a great way for black to try to break down this structure because, yeah, it kind of looks like the king is exposed a little bit. Black does not have a dark square bishop to be able to, like, you know, kind of sacrifice here on this square. And you're not going to sacrifice your queen because that's just going to be the end of the game. So we see knight back to e7. He's trying to see if he can redirect his knight to try to sack on the square. So Torre recognizes that and he plays knight to e3 just in time. Bishop comes to e6. We see queen to e2. Knight comes to g6, like I said, threatening this h3 pawn, trying to rip open this position. And we see knight coming to g2. And so basically Torre just kind of was in time, you know, to be able to get his pieces rolling. So we saw king to g7. The bishop came to c4. As you guys hear me say all the time, when you are up material, it's kind of a little iffy when you're up just a pawn. But when you're up any type of material at all, you know, it's beneficial. It can be very beneficial to trade pieces down, because if we just get rid of all of these pieces for either side, you know, white is just up an entire pawn. You know, it's a lot easier to win in games when you're up even something as small as a pawn. It's not always guaranteed, but it's a little bit easier. So rook 8 comes to e8. We see bishop taking e6, rook taking e6. We got f3 because, you know, white is now trying to open the position to get at this black king. So pawn takes f3. We got rook takes f3. We see rook to f6, rook a to f1. We got pawn takes d4, pawn takes d4. And all of this is actually helping white open the position up for the rooks. And you see that white is looking very good as far as the defense of their king. So, you know, they just have to worry about this queen kind of being undefended here. But, you know, Torre does take care of that shortly. So the rook comes to e8, and then we see queen to d3. Protecting this pawn, but also unpinning the queen, because you couldn't, you weren't able to take immediately because that would be dropping the queen. And, you know, you're just going to be kind of, you know, in a pickle. So you don't want to just drop the piece. So like I said, queen came to d3. The rook took on f3. The rook took on f3. We saw queen to g4. Queen down to f1. We're threatening this weak f7 pawn. So as you can see, the f7 pawn it can be a weakness through the entire game. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be just in the opening or the middle game. You know, it can be pretty much at any point because a lot of the times the king is the only one that's protecting the f7 pawn. Also f2. The king is going to be the only one really defending it. So it's always should be something that you should be thinking about. So we saw knight back to h8. We saw knight to e3. The queen took on e4. Knight comes to f5 with check. The king goes to f8. We have the rook to c3. So we did give a pawn away, but we have very, very active play, and we have a lot of threats going on. We can't move this pawn because we are going to be dropping e6. So for example, if you try to defend or something like that, you're going to be dropping e6 or d6 with a nice little fork. And you unfortunately don't have check here because the rook is defending. So backing up here, Senador actually did go ahead and defend with c8. And so we see king to h2. We got rook. We got queen back to e6. Let me see here. Right. Yes, that's why he did that. Okay, so I was thinking that this was a possibility, and this is me just kind of thinking on the fly, that this was a possibility here, but it does fail to that. So after the queen protects, you do lose a piece. So that's why he didn't do that. Because I was wondering for a second, I was like, why didn't he do that? Because I didn't see that. And then so we see rook to c8, and then that's why the king sidesteps to h2. And now that threat is live. So that knight taking d6 is live because there aren't any checks that win the knight. So after queen comes to e6, just basically making it to where that fork is not going to be possible. We do see queen to f4. We have rook to e8. Now the rook takes on c7. Not only have you won a pawn, but you've put this rook on the 7th rank. So it's a nice pick on the 7th. So it's looking kind of iffy for black now. So the king comes to g8, trying to sidestep any tactics. We do see queen to g5 with check. The knight comes and covers on g6, and we have knight to h6 with check. And this is the position that Senador actually does resign the game. Just to show you guys a couple of variations. After the knight comes to h6 with check, if you did sidestep with the king to f8, you'd be seeing rook takes f7. And this is forcing the queen to take. The queen takes f7, knight takes f7. We have king takes f7, queen to d5 with check. Rook covers on e6, and then we see queen taking b7 with check. And then after the rook covers, we see queen taking a6. Now you do have a queen for, you have the queen against the rook and the knight, but you have a severe, crazy amount of pawns. So this is completely losing for black. So, and also after knight takes h6, or knight goes to h6 with check, if the king does sidestep this way, you see knight taking f7 with check, king coming to g8, the knight back to h6 with check, king back to h8, queen to f5, basically forcing the trade of queens. The queen takes on f5, knight takes on f5, and then you just have too many threats. You have this pawn and this pawn both threatened. And just to run through real quick, if you did try to check and win a pawn, rook to e2 with check, king to h3, rook takes b2, rook to c8 with check, The king comes down to h7. We see h5 kicking the knight. The knight only has one square to go to. That's safe. Knight to h8. Rook comes to c7 with check. King to g8. Rook to g7 with check. King to f8. And h6 is pretty nasty because this pawn is going to push. And you're going to be winning this knight shortly. So that is why the resignation comes. So it was a pretty interesting game. I think, it's pretty instructive, the stuff that I saw in this game. So that's why I went ahead and chose it real quick. But, Maraming Salamat Po sa nanonood ing aking ma video. Maraming Salamat Po aking ma kaibigan. Appreciate you guys very much. And Hagala, appreciate you guys very much for stopping by and taking a look at my stuff. Anybody that's from anywhere else in the world, if you do happen to watch my video, go ahead and just leave a comment down there that you speak a different language. I speak probably close to 100 different languages, so I'm sure I probably have your language. If not, I will learn it. And I'll see you guys next time.